Loomis with Infinity Insurance Partners, and I'm so excited to have Joan Hibden on our webinar today. She is been a great support for me throughout the years, a fantastic coach, and she just wrote a book, and it's Mastering Feedback, and we're going to talk about feedback today. Welcome, Joni.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm super excited to be here, and I'm really happy to be able to share some information about feedback and the importance of feedback and how to look at it differently and ultimately how to master it.
Tell me a little bit about how you or why you decided to write this book and how it all came about.
It's an interesting, well, I find it interesting because I didn't think ever about writing a book about feedback. I'll say that feedback found its way to me, and it was so impactful that it changed my life in such a way that then I wanted to share it with others. So there's two ways that it showed up for me. The first one was that I'd received some really amazing and powerful feedback about 10 years ago from a gentleman whose name is Mark, and his feedback changed my life. I would not be where I am today if not for that. And it was the way that he presented the feedback was in a very direct but kind and compassionate, I'm going to say courageous way, because he had no idea how I was going to react to the feedback. And so I felt very connected to this human being, and I'd known him for a while. The feedback that he provided to me was I had to stop being so effing nice. And the context, I know. I don't know that I'll ever stop being nice, but maybe not effing nice. The context, though, and that he provided me with the feedback is that I was working for a large corporation at the time, leading a learning and development organization. And we had multiple projects happening all at once. And one of my roles in this organization was to present to all of the executive leaders the training that was going to be coming their team's way so that they could make appropriate plans for it. As I'm presenting to Mark the 70 different projects that we're working on, and the context of the feedback was that he noticed for me and with me that I had a tendency to take projects on, even though there wasn't a place to fit them. I would say, sure, no problem, I'll take that on. Sure, my team can do that. And his words to me were, "You're being so effing nice is really, it could negatively impact the organization because we know that you don't have the time or the resources or the budget to do everything that we're asking you to do. And so we need for you to take a step back and start taking a more discerning strategic look at what you're taking on and what you're asking your team to do." I'd never thought of it that way. I actually thought that when I was taking projects on for, in this case, this organization, it's what they wanted me to do. And they did, but they didn't want me to do it in the manner I was doing it. So after I received that feedback, I went out and hired my own executive coach and started to make a lot of changes. And again, I wouldn't be here today if not for that feedback. It made that much of an impact on me. The other way that feedback comes to me, and it comes to me every day these days, is when I'm working with clients, I will get a statement more often than a question around somebody's performance. And the statement is something like this. Joni, I'm having this problem with Mark, and Mark is not doing his job the way that I need him to do it. And I don't know what to do. And I'll ask the question, have you given Mark feedback? And the answer often, not always, but often is no. And I'll say, why not? And then the response is, I'm not sure how to say it. I'm not sure how to deliver the feedback. I'm afraid that Mark might get upset. He might get defensive. He might get mad. He might quit. And I don't want any of those things to happen. And so I haven't provided him with feedback at all. And so I'll spend time with clients then unpacking that and then coming up with a framework that will work for the client to actually then deliver the feedback. So that's how it came to me. And I wanted to share a lot of the things that I'd learned over the years with people and provide something that was comprehensive, relatable, and digestible. And that's how that all came to be.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive into it. And I just want to remind everybody that if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And there are also going to be some handouts later on, and we look forward to your engagement. I will.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jessica. So hi, everybody. And thank you so much for coming on and participating with us today. My name is Joan. I go by Joni Hibden. And one of the things that I love to do with businesses and with people is to help inspire and cultivate leadership excellence, because I want employees to have extraordinary experiences at work. We spend far too much time at work. And one of my least favorite things when I'm working with people is when they say, I really love what I do, but I hate my job. And I'll say, why do you hate your job? And oftentimes the answer is because my boss is fill in the blank. And I really feel as though bosses don't have to be those things, and they don't want to be. And so what I love to do is work with people and leaders in organizations to help them be the best versions of themselves. And so feedback has some context to do that. Think back to the feedback that Mark gave to me, which was, you need to change your ways a little bit. So I'm grateful for all of that. In addition to doing what I do from a business standpoint with JDH Insights, I'm also a partner, a mother. I love doing a lot of things outdoors, and just naturally kind of a creative person. So thanks again for being here. So today what I want to do with all of you, and invite you to ask questions in the chat, or Jessica, if you have any insights or questions that you have, don't hesitate asking. But I want to introduce to all of you a different way perhaps of looking at feedback. And what's important to me about this and in doing this with all of you is that sometimes when we think about feedback, particularly in the context of I need to give feedback to somebody, we have a tendency of human beings to get pretty stressed out about it because we don't know what to say, we don't know how to say it. And I want to provide to you this lens that feedback actually happens all of the time, and it exists around us in our world more often than you could possibly imagine. And so I want to encourage you to start looking for feedback and also ways to provide feedback. So consider these things. Consider that when you were younger, or even in today's world, and I'm going to go through this list a little bit one by one, consider the first time that you ever tried out for or played a sport. When you were doing that, we were often getting feedback mechanisms, whether it was from a team member saying, hey, you've got to pass the ball. That's a form of feedback. Or you're not good enough to play on this team. That's a form of feedback. Or you made the team, or you're on varsity, or whatever it is. When we were younger, feedback was coming at us all the time. Playing a sport, acting in a play, or think about being in choir or being in a band. All of those things that when we were little bitty people that we actually had access to, and feedback was coming to us all of the time. Director of a choir, a coach of a sport, it was always coming to us. And we also were getting feedback from those people who were our teachers. And if you're still in school today or going to, taking a certification program, we're getting feedback through the grading of our assignments. And we're getting it from areas where we can enhance and improve our capabilities. So it's happening all of the time, especially in learning and environments like that. The other place that it happens is in very subtle ways. And I encourage all of you to take a look at seeing where it's showing up in your world. Things like opening a door. When you open a door for somebody, I'm guessing that typically people will turn around and say thank you. They might go on to say, thank you, that was so kind. That's a form of feedback. Also, when you're ordering a coffee or your favorite beverage from a barista in the morning, ordering that coffee is also a place where you might find feedback, or ordering breakfast. And I want you to consider this. How many times have you been provided with your favorite warm or even hot beverage, and the beverage has come back to you, and it's come back perhaps lukewarm? How often do you pause and turn around and say, hey, would you mind warming this up? This is lukewarm, because that's a form of feedback. Or how often do you take it just as it is with a little bit of a disappointment and, this isn't the way that I wanted it, and I'm not going to say anything about it. It could be a quick micro choice to not say the thing to get the thing that you want. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we're all guilty of it, right? Sometimes we take things just the way it's served to us because that's the way it's served to us. as opposed to getting what we want by providing some clear, direct feedback and asking for what we want. So that's a nuanced or subtle way too. The other ways is when we're working on a project with one another. Certainly in a business world, when we're doing one-on-one meetings with one another, there are ways to provide feedback and to connect directly with feedback. And I'll provide you with a simple tool about how to do that toward the end of today's webinar. And then the last is the lovable and at the same time dreaded annual performance reviews. And everybody that I talk to and everybody that I know, and me included once upon a time, when it was annual performance review time, I would get a little bit stressed out, a little bit testy, because then I really had to think about the things that I needed to say or wanted to say, whether really great things, shining accolades, or even areas for course correction. The annual performance review always kind of stops us a little bit, creates some stress. But feedback is, the mechanisms are there. So my challenge to all of us on this webinar today is to challenge yourself to practice getting feedback. I'm going to provide you with one other area of context. And Jess, I know that you know about this a little bit. And that is that when, especially if you're in a leadership role and employees are coming into your organization and you've got candidates lined up and you're going through the interview process, candidates are coming into the interview process and they want to give you the best performance of their life because a job depends on it. And so oftentimes what I'll say to people, and I've heard CEOs say it too, is that our candidates, whoever we're interviewing, they are giving us the best performance of their life in that interview. And we may not see that best performance when they actually come onto the job. I'm not sure how many of you have hired people or interviewed people and then after hiring them think, this is not the same person I interviewed. What happened to that person? and so what happens is that when candidates, get a job offer, they accept the job, they go a little bit unconscious. And what I mean by that is that they don't think about the fact that they have stepped on a metaphorical stage in your organization. And they don't think about the fact that you are, in fact, the director of the performance of this play that they have chosen to audition for and now they're part of. And sometimes as leaders, we forget that we're the director of the actor on the stage and we should be directing them on how we want them to perform. So it's an interesting thing that happens with human behavior. When people come on board and we forget to actually direct them and give them clear and concise feedback on what we want them to do. Now, Jess, you and I have worked together for a long time, and I know that is not your nature. Your nature actually is to be really clear and concise and to have people do what you want them to do. But that doesn't always happen in organizations. So I just wanted to introduce this concept to you and this principle that feedback is happening all of the time around us. And if only you look for it, you'll find it. So
and I would have to say, even with my clear and direct feedback, sometimes people take it a lot more personal, I think, than where I'm coming from. And so I sometimes have to learn how to soften my approach.
Absolutely. I think, and that's the interesting thing for me about feedback, because we're all unique human beings. And, there's almost 8 billion of us on the planet, and each of us are very different. And so your way of delivering feedback might be different than my way of delivering feedback. But then you throw in the other person, which is their way of receiving feedback or what's important to them, when receiving feedback. And oftentimes we don't think about feedback consciously until it shows up. And then we get stressed out and we operate from what I call a red zone, where we move into this stress response. So it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to experience. But what I would say is that at the core of it, and this is what I believe, feedback is truly a gift. Even when it's difficult, even when you don't feel like it, even when the other person doesn't want it. If you give it with purpose and compassion and clarity, I do believe that growth of another and connection with each other is possible. I think about that time with Mark, my opening, reason why I wrote the book. I'm not sure whether Mark was, the executive in the organization I worked with that drew the short straw in giving me the feedback, because it took him a lot of courage to give me that feedback, and he did it in such a way that I was ready to hear it. I would be lying if I said that I'd never heard the feedback, that I took on too much, that I said yes too often. But oftentimes when I was given that feedback, it was, especially if it was, hey, you're taking on too much. My response then was, look at me, I can take on more, because that's a high achiever aspect of me. I'll just keep taking it on. And I recognize that I also have this pleasing aspect too. But what I wanted to share with all of you is that it was a gift to me that he provided me with the feedback. And what I did with it afterwards is I went and checked in with all of the executives in the organization after we talked. And I said, I just received this feedback. Do you think it's true too? And every executive said, yes, we see this being a problem. And so then from there, I was able to make some discerning choices about how I wanted to show up with each of their requests, and gave each other permission for them to give me feedback as well. So it opened up a lot of doors. So I do think feedback is a gift, especially if it's given with purpose and compassion and clarity. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And here's what's important to know too, is that according to a lot of different surveys, but this one is the one I wanted to pop in here for today, this 2019 survey by Zanger-Folkman says that 94% of respondents agree that if corrective feedback is given and presented well, their performance will improve. So if it's given in a manner that they can hear it and they feel connected and they feel seen and cared for and valued, they will correct their performance. And almost 67% said that their performance and possibilities for success would have increased if they had received more feedback. What's important about this is that, I find it pretty common in organizations, is that employees are wanting more feedback and they're not getting it. And here's one great example. I had an employee, I didn't have the employee, but there was an employee that was working for a client, and she was fresh out of college. She'd been with the client for about 5 months, and I happened to be at the client site in the break room, and I said, hey, it's great to see you. How are things going? How are you liking your job? And she said, you know what? I really like my job, but I'm not sure that this is the place for me yet. And I said, why not? She said, well, I've been here for almost 5 months, and my manager hasn't given me any feedback. Not good feedback, not I need to do something different feedback. She hasn't given me any feedback. And I said, are you sure? I said, has she indicated at all, you've done a great job? And she said, oh, she'll say you're doing a great job, but that's not feedback because it's not clear. I have no idea what that great, you're doing a great job means. I'd like more specific feedback. And I said, well, have you asked your manager for it? And she said, no, I think that's the manager's job. I said, well, it's an interesting perspective, but I think it would be important and insightful for your manager to know that feedback is important to you. So I'd encourage you to go and say, hey, I'd like some more clear and concise feedback. Would you mind giving it to me? Because I want to make sure that I'm on the right path and I want to grow with this organization. And so she went, I'll give it a go. And she did. She became more clear about it. The manager had no idea that she wasn't giving feedback that was meaningful. So they were able to course correct a little bit. But employees want feedback and they really need it to grow. Has that been your case, Jess?
I would say yes. We definitely try to have regular meetings to engage the employee and to have that open dialogue, because it is something that's important. And some people need even more feedback than that. Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to know what people need. Some people just want to be left alone. So
right. Yeah.
As long as I'm not doing anything wrong, I don't need to hear from you. It's like,
right. Okay. And there is that school of thought. I was just at an event the other night, and somebody made the comment that in the former work world that they worked in, that if you didn't hear anything, that was a good thing. And so every culture and every human has a little bit of a different aspect of feedback. I think as leaders, I think it's up to us to ask people, So, how do you take feedback, and how, what's important to you around feedback? Do you need it frequently, not frequently? And as part of the onboarding process, just so that we can get to know each other's kind of rhythm and flow. Again, I've got a tool to share with you later on that I think will be really helpful and perhaps help people normalize feedback in their workplaces.
I think that's a great idea, just to ask that in an interview, like,
Yeah.
What's important to you?
Yeah.
In that situation.
It's one of those, it's a communication skill that there's a lot of assumptions built around it. And then we forget to ask. And it's, it's of no fault of anybody's. It's just it's not very present. And that's why this idea around mastering feedback, and that's why sharing this information out to a lot of people is important to me, is to not take feedback for granted and to start making it a more conscious communication choice. So
agreed.
Anyway, so as we know, feedback can be uncomfortable to give and to receive. In the context of today, I really want us to sit in the chairs of giving feedback. So we're in the place of practicing how to give feedback. And when we think about giving feedback, what often comes front and center most of the time is this fear around giving feedback. What I'd love to do, and I don't know whether the participants are interested, but I would love to know from the participant side on this webinar, what it is that causes fear for you to give feedback. I'd like this to be a little bit interactive if we can make it that way.
Yes, definitely. If anyone can come up with a question, and in the meantime, I will, because I do not like to give feedback. I think that's probably one of the scariest things for me. And it's only, I guess, I think it's the fear of the unknown, like how they're going to react and how they're going to respond to the feedback. And again, me being so direct, I would have to say that I fear that I'm going to upset them, right? Because of the way I present. So I try, it's almost like I'm walking on eggshells. I almost can't be myself when I'm presenting that feedback, because I don't, maybe it's because I don't know how to, or I'm afraid that I'm going to offend them and hurt their feelings. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon fear, because we don't know how they're going to react. And Tammy, I see your response too, is the fear is their response. We have no idea how they're going to react and how it's going to come back to us. And we don't know whether they're going to cry, whether they're going to get super defensive, or whether they're going to get argumentative. What happens, and here's where fear resides typically, is fear resides in our stress response. It's an amygdala hijacking experience that we have. And where that stress response comes from are those moments when we feel as though we are under attack somehow. And so as humans, if we feel like we're under attack, then we move quickly into the stress response, which creates a constriction where we feel like we're going to get it wrong. And so we retreat. And oftentimes feedback isn't provided because of that, because of the potential response. We don't know whether we're going to be attacked, and we certainly aren't on the attack, but it feels like that for some people. So webinar for another time, but we can talk about the stress response, especially around giving feedback, and how it can really throw us into a place of constriction. The only way to move out of constriction, actually, from a sympathetic nervous system standpoint, is to take some really deep breaths. Think yoga breaths or meditation breaths, to breathe. And once we can get breath and oxygen into our brain, it starts to let go of the constriction, and it creates more of an opening to create a more calm and connected space. It's for another time, but that's where fear comes from. But the fear also comes from, what if I get it wrong? Just as you were saying, like, you're typically direct, but you walk on eggshells because you don't want to get it wrong. What if they get mad? What if they cry? What if they quit? What if somebody, throws a chair? That might happen, and it may not happen. But our fear always comes first in this case. What we don't think about when it comes to feedback is, what is the purpose of feedback? So think about the purpose of feedback in the context of why you would ever give it.
I know in my situation, it's just so that we can improve as a team. And, just that's usually the reason, right? I want to improve as a team, because here we try to really make it a team effort. And so it's, if someone's not doing their job or it's not being done the way we need it to be done, it's affecting everybody else.
Right.
So it really is, the purpose of making sure we're doing things as a team and getting that support from one another. So
it really is. I mean, oftentimes the purpose of it is to make sure that we're improving, like you said, your team and your team and how your team is operating, Jessica, is key to the success of your business. And so if feedback can't be provided in all ways to continue to improve the team effort and the team dynamic and the service that you provide to your customers, if we're not able to say that, then nothing changes, nothing improves. So I love how you talked about the team improvement piece. I think there's certainly, always the individual improvement, the ability to grow. I think about opportunities in organizations when people want to get better at what they do, they need feedback from somebody who's got some different experience. So the purpose of giving feedback is to help with career growth, with your role growth. It's used to provide course correction, to clear up mistakes. The purpose of feedback is huge. But again, oftentimes we let fear get in the way of purpose. And I wanted to highlight this purpose like this so that for all of you who are on this webinar to think about in the future, what is the fear of my giving feedback and what is my purpose? And really take a look at those two side by side and then make a choice. Do you sit in fear or do you move forward with purpose? So in this context, think about it this way. If we put fear in front of purpose, nothing will change, nothing improves, because we're hiding out. If we put purpose in front of fear, anything is possible. Anything is possible. But the thing is that all you can do is be 100% responsible for who you are, how you show up, how you communicate and deliver the feedback, and trust that that person is going to respond as they respond. They might cry. And if they cry, how do you want to show up if they cry? You want to sit there, be compassionate. If they get mad, how do you want to show up if they get mad? Do you want to become argumentative? Or is again, putting the purpose in front of their reaction may help diffuse whatever stress you're feeling around their reaction. So if you can show up, clear about the feedback, compassionate, connected, and caring with the person, and lean into that, there's every possibility that on the other side of that, they'll say, I hadn't heard that before, or I've heard that before and I don't know what to do about it. But your job in providing the feedback is to be thoughtful about how you're doing it and in a manner that comes from you and not in, I want to say, prescription of how they're going to respond to it. So Jessica, you used the term earlier, walking on eggshells. I'm not going to say that this isn't going to happen, but consider the possibility that the person that you want to give feedback to, you really care about. And I know that you really care about all of your employees. You really care about, and you know that the purpose is for their own good and for the good of the organization. So how do you frame the words for yourself around what that is? And just know that if it's coming from your heart, from your connection, from all of that, there's a possibility that they're not going to get mad. There's a possibility that they will. But you can't control that over there. What you can control is yourself. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it definitely does. I mean, if you're holding back and you're not sharing that feedback, it creates resentment and frustration. And, if you're able to communicate it, like you said, in a way with compassion and that openness and willingness to I don't know, figure out how to make this work,
Mhm.
then, you're going to have a better result than that resentment and that frustration in the background.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you just said, and this is again trying to figure out, your style in giving feedback, I think is really critical, because there's almost 8 billion people on this earth, and everybody has a very different style. I think, using words like you just used, like I really care about you and I want to make this work. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring this to your attention, because I see something that you don't see. And here's the feedback. We'll talk a little bit more about some tools in a minute. But think about this even. Sometimes, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but there have been times in my life where I wish somebody would have given me feedback about something so simple. Things like having lettuce in my teeth,
Oh,
after
yes.
lunch and things like that, or even lipstick on my teeth. And I'll be walking around for hours, smiling at people, and I have no idea I have lettuce in my teeth, and nobody gives me that feedback. Nobody says anything, and I think oftentimes, again, it's because of the fear of embarrassing me, the fear of embarrassing themselves.
Right.
And I would have much preferred to know that I had lettuce in my teeth.
Or I was
So,
told one day, like, that, the bad breath or something like that. Not me specifically, but hey, did you notice that, that person, they oftentimes have bad breath, and it's like, oh, okay, I've never noticed that before, but maybe we should say something
yeah.
so that they know, right?
Well, the interesting thing is that oftentimes we do say something, but never to the person who can fix the
Right.
thing, right? We talk
Right.
amongst ourselves, and and it's classic. It's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just classic human behavior. But the whole purpose of this webinar is to encourage people to lean in and to find your own voice and your own way to provide feedback, even if it is scary.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the other thing I wanted to share with the participants and with you today is that there is a huge cost of not giving feedback. And this is one of the chapters in my book, and it may be one of the longest chapters. But when we don't give feedback, it ultimately hits the bottom line in a lot of different ways. One way, and it's one of the stories that I share in my book, is and it wasn't my experience. It was an experience that this woman whose name is Sherry Harley had. And she is also an expert on feedback, and she speaks about it as well. And she was talking in one of her talks about having had somebody after one of her presentations come and share with her that they hadn't given feedback to somebody that they really needed to, but they were afraid to, for almost 4 years. And this practice manager was telling Sherry that she said, I haven't given her the feedback, which I've noticed it's become problematic because I've been taking job responsibilities away from her. And Sherry said, why haven't you given her feedback? So, the background story is the practice manager had this employee on her team. The employee was not doing their job effectively. And so because the employee wasn't doing their job effectively, the practice manager was taking responsibilities off of the employee's desk, either taking them on and doing them herself, or even worse, delegating them to somebody on the team. And she had been doing this because the employee was really nice and everybody loved the employee and nobody wanted to lose the employee, and they didn't want to hurt the employee's feelings. So they just kept taking things away from the employee's job responsibilities until until the job almost didn't exist. And I thought about that example, and it's not uncommon. I mean, I think we can all get caught in this trap sometimes. I thought about that example and I figured, okay, so one employee, 4 years of not providing feedback and eroding that person's responsibilities. But imagine that person made, say, $50,000 a year. So $50,000 a year that you're essentially writing off. Either the manager, the practice manager is doing the job, or somebody on the team is. $50,000 times 4, that's $100,000 to the bottom line of having somebody in the organization in a position not being effective, but still getting paid for it. So that's a huge one to consider, especially if you're one of those people whose fear is so big that you're not giving feedback to somebody, but you're potentially taking job responsibilities off their plate. there's a cost there. There's a cost to you because you're doing more work, or there's a cost to your employees because they've taken on more work and probably feeling resentful about the employee who's not doing the work. So I thought that was a fascinating story, and it does happen. I hear that happen. I hear about that all the time.
Well, and we're guilty of that. Not 4 years, thank goodness, but just because we needed someone in the office and sitting there welcoming people into the office, and we continue to have to take things off their plate because they couldn't do that, but they were a warm body in the office. And it did cost us money.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. So again, I want to share with you and with others on this call that there is a cost to it. And so to take a look at, like, if you're putting the fear way out in front of you and not the purpose, consider what the cost and the ramifications are of not providing feedback. The other cost too, and this shows up in organizations as well, is that sometimes we choose not to give feedback to an employee who potentially could course correct and do their jobs. But instead, what we choose to do is we move to termination pretty quickly. And I've seen this happen in organizations where the organization would rather choose to pay out a severance package of whatever the amount is than to give the employee clear and specific feedback and look for improvement. And that's a real cost. And especially if organizations from a practice standpoint start to do that, and then that becomes their standard course of performance management, it's a very costly proposition. So I wanted to build this into this presentation just to have people kind of consider that piece too. So this is a question I'm going to pose to all of you. And this is for those of you who are on this webinar. I'd like for you to consider that feedback takes practice. And with this, I'd like for you to consider, what is it that you currently today regularly practice? And Jessica, I know that you play golf. I play golf occasionally. I certainly don't practice often enough. But why do we practice playing golf?
Because we enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we enjoy it or why we enjoy it, because it's the most frustrating game in the whole wide world. But I enjoy the satisfaction of being able to hit a ball several hundred yards.
Mm-hmm. Right? It's frustrating, but we go out there and we practice, sometimes go to the driving range, and we go out to practice so we can get better and not hit it several hundred yards, or several feet in my case, but several hundred yards. So we practice that. Some of us play musical instruments, and we practice musical instruments so we can get better. Some of us practice yoga. Some of us practice meditation. I know people who are, whether you're a cyclist or perhaps a triathlete or even a hiker, we're always looking to improve what we're doing. And feedback is a similar thing. Feedback is a similar muscle that unless we practice it, we don't get better. And so I would encourage all of you to think about how you practice feedback, and look around in areas in your life where you can do this. I'll provide you with at least one personal example of feedback in my personal life. So a few weeks ago, I went out to breakfast, and as I was ordering my breakfast, I love English muffins, but I like them extra toasted, almost burnt. I like the charred flavor on an English muffin. And so I had ordered my breakfast, and it said I'd like it almost burnt. And my meal came back out to me. And when the waitress came back around to check, she said, "How is everything?" And I said, for me, everything is delicious. And I would have really loved having my English muffin almost burnt like I ordered it. Came back kind of a medium toasted. And she said, "How burnt?" And I said, like literally almost burnt. And she said, well then if you want it that way, here you have to order it. I want it burnt, burnt, burnt. And I said, "I have to say burnt 3 times?" And she said, "Here's the thing. The kitchen really doesn't like to have almost charred food come out of its kitchen because it smells bad when it goes through the restaurant. So we don't like to do it that way, but if you feel really strongly about it, we need to know that up front." so it was an interesting exchange because I practiced giving feedback around my charred English muffin, and then I learned something from her
Yeah.
in that, and she gave me feedback on how I needed to order it. And it was so subtle, but it was so delightful that I thought, okay, next time I go back, I'm going to give it a try. I want it burnt.
Okay. Well, and Tammy makes a good point. Yes, Tammy, you do practice to get better. Absolutely. And a lot of us need to learn how to give feedback and practice to get better. So,
Yeah. So I encourage and challenge all of you to practice getting better at feedback. With that, one of the things that I'd like to, pause right now and to ask all of you to consider, and if you want to, by all means, take a picture of this slide, and or we've got a handout to give you. But this is one way to practice giving feedback. And that is to begin to really think about it and jot a few notes about, is there somebody in your life that would benefit giving feedback? Thanks, Jessica, for downloading this.
absolutely.
Is there somebody that would benefit from getting feedback? And if so, jot their name down. And then what is your relationship with that person? And what do you know about that person? What is your relationship? It could be they're my boss, they're my peer, they're a coworker, they're my direct report. It could be they're a family member, whoever it is. Just jot it down, think about who it is, what do you know about them? Then what is the purpose of the feedback? Is it to let them know that you don't like what you don't like something about what they're doing? Is it to course correct? Is it because they keep making these mistakes? What is the purpose of it? Then consider, what is your fear in giving feedback? And then I want you to turn it around a little bit more and to consider, at the end of the feedback, what is the outcome that you want to create by providing this feedback? In other words, how do you want that person to feel? And what do you want them to do? And then, write down, and this is in the handout, write down what you want to convey to that person. And then my challenge to you is that after doing this exercise, go give it a try. It may not be perfect, but this will put you on the court to practice a little bit. So, quick story about this. Again, personal story on this side as well. I recently provided my husband with some feedback. And so I know this person. I know that he gets defensive sometimes when I give him feedback. I get defensive when I get feedback sometimes too. We all do. But here's what the feedback was. What I noticed in my co-working kitchen is I noticed that the dishes, when he was done eating his lunch, he would rinse his dishes and put them in one part of the sink, which I think is wonderful. What I really wanted him to do was to put the dishes from the sink into the dishwasher, like complete the whole job. And so one day I said to him, do you mind if I give you feedback? And he got pretty tense about it. And I said, you do a great job in rinsing the dishes off. I just would love to give you some feedback that would be helpful for me if you put them all the way in the dishwasher. And his response was, well, you never rinse your dishes off before you put them in the dishwasher. Okay. I said, all right. Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to take it. I'll do a better job in rinsing my dishes. And honest to goodness, even to this day, I always look to make sure that my dishes are completely rinsed before I put them in the dishwasher. I said, thanks for the feedback. And I would also appreciate it if you put your dishes all the way into the dishwasher. And so even in that moment, right, a personal experience, hard for me to practice because I knew he was going to get defensive, but important for me to say because I didn't want to keep doing that job for the next how many years of my life. I wanted him to do the complete work. So just a simple, funny example of feedback in a personal space.
And I think it's even harder to give feedback when you have that close of a relationship with someone because you do get more defensive just in general.
It's super hard. But that's how I put myself on the court. That's how I practice. So one of the other things I want to share with all of you is to consider checking in, creating safety with people. Let the person know why they're important to you and ask them if it's okay for you to give feedback. Like, I really care about our working relationship, and I have a piece of feedback that I'd like to give you. Is it okay if I share it with you? And if accepted, share your feedback, what you notice, what you observe. And then after you provide the feedback, depending upon what kind of person that is when they receive feedback, some people are processors. But this is why this check-in to see what they heard and what they received and what they'd like to process. It's important to check in to say, did you get that? Do you have any questions? Do you need to process this? When can we get back together? And then when you do get back together, just ask them what they're planning to do with the feedback and where you might be able to help. Because here's the thing, not everybody's going to do something with the feedback that you offer. In fact, a big complaint that I get from people when I speak with them about feedback is, I've given them feedback 4 or 5 times and they've done nothing with it. And I'll ask the question, have you asked them if they're going to do anything with it? And they're like, no, I just assumed that they would. Yeah, well, don't assume that they will. Ask them what they're going to do and ask them where you can help. Because sometimes people want to do something, but they don't know what the next step is. And so I think that's where our roles come into play to see where we can help out. Okay?
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to do something now. This is the tool that I was going to share with you. And this is a little bit different. I'm going to set it up this way. I would love to receive feedback from you in this moment. And again, for the participants, by all means, please provide me with feedback. This tool is called a 2x2. And so I would love your feedback on 2 things I did well and 2 things I could do better. And here's how you use this tool in the workplace, is that whether you're a manager or a peer, whatever your role is to approach people and invite them to give you feedback and start to normalize it. So what are 2 things that I did well? What are 2 things I could do better? And then turn it around and say, would you mind if I offered you feedback on 2 things that you do well and 2 things that I think you could do better? So it's a tool that you can use pretty quickly in the workplace. And Jessica and others on the phone, if you've got direct reports, it's a tool that I would encourage you to implement into your one-on-one meetings and introduce it to the person that reports to you and say, we're going to try this new thing out and we're going to give each other feedback, because in this case, Jessica, with your team, you're always looking for team improvement overall. And so how do you begin to utilize this tool? So for the audience participants, I would love it if you would provide me direct feedback right now. And Jess, if you want to do it with me right now, with this presentation, what are 2 things that I did well? And what are 2 things that I could do better?
Well, I'm going to say that I really liked the last slide. I've never really, I think that was fantastic, because I never really thought to ask someone if I could give them feedback. And that allows them to kind of give us that, that safe space. So that was fantastic. And then, a second one here. I love the story, about, Mark. And, I thought that is a great segue, because that's what inspired you to come up with your book. And then 2 things you could do better. Well, I was hoping for the song. I know that that's not some people that knew. I was hoping for the song.
And I can do that. I felt myself chickening out.
It's okay.
I'll do it.
No, it's totally fine. So for those of you that don't know, Joni plays the guitar and probably multiple instruments, I'm assuming. And is and a songstress. So I was hoping for the song, but it's okay. And then I'm trying to think of another one. Because I mean, I felt I loved the interaction today. What could you do better? I could only think of the one thing.
Okay.
But anyone else, if anyone else can give some feedback, we'd love to hear it. So
I appreciate the practice that you just demonstrated, Jessica. I think that was fantastic, because again, it's about getting on the court and what Jessica's talking about, and I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to do it, especially if people will give feedback on 2 things I did well and 2 things I could do better. And it could be a 1-on-1. But I in this moment, as I turned this slide, I kind of held back and chickened out. I do not have my guitar, but I'm willing to put myself out there, and I'm willing to sing a song. And the song is, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away."
Daughter's in my favorite song. I used to sing that to her every night. That's awesome.
Oh, I love that. Yes, I love that. So I just put myself onto the stage, the metaphorical stage, and now I'm asking all of you to get on the court and provide me with feedback on that. Again, at least one thing I did well and one thing I could do better.
Well, I do see that Tammy did say, she did give her 2 positives. She said it was very interesting and engaging, and the way you easily communicate.
Oh, thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that. And Amber, thank you.
Yes.
All
And
right.
we got to hear anything that she could do better. We got to hear some what is it, constructive feedback?
Constructive, yeah, constructive, or something that was missing for you, anything at all.
Come on, Amber, I know you can do it.
I can think of one thing, but I'm going to wait and see if anybody else thinks of it.
She's trying.
Okay, so Tammy says it was a little fast-paced. Thank you.
Okay.
That's great feedback. So slow it down a little bit. Great.
All right. Well, we can move on.
We can move on. Here's what I want to share with all of you, is that if we shield ourselves from all feedback, that is giving it and receiving it, we stop growing. And during a session that I just did the other night, and it was an in-person session, somebody shared with me that they don't like to receive positive feedback. It makes them uncomfortable, right? So I want all of you, as you leave today, think about when somebody gives you positive or appreciative feedback, what you do with it. Because oftentimes many of us will say, "Oh, I was just doing my job," or "It's no problem," or, "No worries," that kind of thing. When somebody comes your way and provides you with positive feedback, I encourage you to say thank you. Because even that simple thank you, it helps us continue to grow in our own confidence. And this Brene Brown quote, I just absolutely love. If we shield ourselves from all feedback, whether really great feedback or corrective, growth-oriented feedback, we stop growing. So I encourage you to take this webinar and this presentation and continue to learn how to master feedback and by practicing. And if you have any questions, here's how you can find me. Here's how you can find my book. Happy to help with whatever you need. But feedback is a lot of fun for me. I hope you found this fun too.
Yes, and I did. That was awesome. It was my sunshine. That just made me happy.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here on this webinar. I've caught at least one of your webinars. They're all very engaging. So I want to give you some feedback, Jessica, that I think these webinars that you're offering to the universe and to the audiences that are out there, keep it up. They matter and they mean something. So thank you for inviting me to be on your webinar.
Yes, and thank you for coming. I'm so excited, and we all got to go out and buy that book.
All right. Thank you. I look forward to everybody's feedback. Let me know, however it comes. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. You have a fantastic day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Bye.